Hello, and welcome to Casually Criterion. My name is Chris.
And my name is Justin. Casually Criterion is a weekly podcast where Chris and I are going to watch a film from the Criterion Collection and talk about it. And we started at spine number 1, and we're going forward chronologically. If you want to follow the podcast, you can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/casuallycriterion podcast. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at casualcriterion. And if you want to contact us about anything else, you can just email us at casuallycriterion@gmail.com.
Today's episode, Spine number 7, A Night to Remember by Roy Ward Baker.
And before we get into A Night to Remember, we're going to talk about what's going on in our minds in the movie world and maybe in the podcast world. We'll get there too. But first up, Chris, what do you got?
Intriguing bit of news this week. Supposedly, Quentin Tarantino and J.J. Abrams got together, and they're going to make a Star Trek film. Now, it's not conclusive as to whether Tarantino's going to direct it or who's going to direct it, but they're using Tarantino's idea, and they are. It is going to be an R-rated film.
Yeah, apparently Tarantino came in and pitched the idea to J.J. Abrams and Paramount, and one of his stipulations for them to be able to use the idea was that the film had to be R-rated.
Yeah. Quentin Tarantino was on the Nerdist podcast a while back, and he actually kind of pitched a Star Trek idea to them, because he's like, I really like the first movie, like the reboot movie. His pitch was to take some of those TV show episodes and make them into a full-length movie. That was kind of his idea, at least according to the Nerdist, like when he pitched it on the Nerdist. So it'll be interesting to see if that's kind of the idea that he's coming with. But is this something that intrigues you? Do you want to see a Quentin Tarantino, we don't know for sure, but a Quentin Tarantino directed Star Trek film?
I'm intrigued by the idea of a Quentin Tarantino sci-fi film, because I think this would be his first venture into the sci-fi genre. He does a lot of like this sort of spaghetti western stuff, but he also kind of goes through different genres. At least he did like for a while there. We had like the war film, the western, the kung fu sort of samurai movie.
Kill Bill to me was just a smorgasbord of different genres.
Sure.
She's basically fighting her way in the cinema from screen to screen, like going from genre to genre.
Yeah. So it interests me to think about him doing a sci-fi film. I don't necessarily care that it's Star Trek, because I don't know, I'm not that into Star Trek. Like the most I've ever liked a Star Trek film was like the reboot, and I've seen some of the TV, I've seen some of the older movies, but I've just never really been that into Star Trek. So it's not that exciting to me, but I guess I am excited to see what a unique director like that who's going to make a rated R film will do with like a franchise like Star Trek. Like if he was doing Star Wars, or if he was doing a comic book superhero movie or something like that, like I would be intrigued to see like what he does.
Yeah, I think he fits better in the Star Trek universe than he does in the Star Wars. I guess maybe I've had a little bit more like when I was a kid, I watched Star Trek: The Next Generation all the time. And I love that TV show, and I watched all the movies when they came out, the Next Generation movies. And I think that First Contact is a really, really good movie. Just like whether it's a Star Trek movie or not, it's a good movie.
Let me ask you, do you actually think that he'll direct it? I know it's like inconclusive.
Do I think he will? So I know that like up until this week, all the news about Quentin Tarantino was about this 1969 movie, aka Charles Manson movie that he was going to make.
Yeah.
So like up until this week, we all thought that we were going to get this Charles Manson movie, or 1969 movie. So I kind of don't think he will. I think it's just his idea, but I hope that he does. I want to see what it looks like with him directing it.
And all the stuff that I've read in regards to the Charles Manson movie, from what I've read, it sounds like the script is going to be written as he's doing his Charles Manson movie. So I think that one is still actually on the slate.
Oh, for the Star Trek. So
he'll do that. He'll do the Charles Manson movie. They'll work on the script while he's making that.
Okay.
And then the next thing will be the Star Trek film. But about that, the script is being written by somebody else. I think he brought in like 3 screenwriters and had like a sit down meeting with them, like all together, like a writer's room sort of thing. Mm-hmm. And they're going to pick one of them to write the screenplay, which is obviously interesting for Tarantino because
he usually writes his own stuff.
Yeah, he writes his own and directs everything he directs. He's written,
mm-hmm.
right? And I guess that sort of information is what really leads me to believe that he's not going to direct it. And honestly, I mean, as a director, he has a certain style and skill set, but I mean, one of the bigger things about his film is his writing. So like, I guess I'd be more excited if Tarantino was going to write it and someone else was going to direct it than if someone else is going to write it and Tarantino's going to direct.
Yeah, that's interesting because he was really frustrated by Jackie Brown because, I mean, he wrote it, but it was based on a book by
Elmore Leonard.
Elmore Leonard. So, but he was really frustrated because it wasn't necessarily his idea; it was an adaptation. So, it'll be interesting to see whether he actually directs it or not.
One of my favorite films of his that he's involved with is True Romance, which he wrote and didn't direct. So, I'm kind of on the side of like I would want him to write more than I want him directed. Like, I at least want him to write it. If he directs it, that's great. But it seems like he's not going to write it. So
yeah, which also then it's just his idea, like, and then he's just really removed from it. I like the idea of like either writing or directing, and then that way he has a big chunk of influence over it. Right now, if he doesn't do either one of those, it's just kind of his idea.
Yeah. It could turn into like produced by Quentin Tarantino sort of thing, and like Hostel was, and other things. But they can slap his name on the cover, and like I don't know if you remember this working at Blockbuster, like people thought like Quentin Tarantino made Hostel, and several other films. A lot
of movies that way, because he would just slap. Or same thing with a lot of directors do that. Martin Scorsese, and like because they their name will bring in the movie, and bring in money. So in order to support like younger filmmakers and stuff, they put their name on it and bring it in.
Although I guess Star Trek doesn't need that.
No, but I'll tell you, just this week, the amount that my Facebook blew up over Quentin Tarantino possibly directing a Star Trek, like that brings in, like Star Trek movies probably make money whether they're good or bad. A Quentin Tarantino Star Trek movie could make a lot more money because not only are you getting the Star Trek people, but you're getting the Quentin Tarantino people. So it'll be interesting to see what happens.
Yeah, well, we'll keep an eye on it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, well, so my bit of news isn't so much about movies, it's so much about this podcast. Chris and I have been talking over the last week or two, and we had the idea that we would change up the format of the podcast a little bit. So far, we've been doing like one Criterion spy number every week and doing an episode every week, which means that we have to watch a film, do some research on it, record the episode, and edit it all like within a week. And I guess what we came down on is that we kind of feel like we're maybe rushing the Criterion film reviews out.
Oh, we could do more on each Criterion film. And we kind of feel like if we keep this pace up, we're going to not be able to give as much as we need to for each film. Especially our next episode is we're going to do 2 John Woo movies. So like along those lines, we want to make sure that we give each Criterion episode time to get ready.
Yeah, time to like resonate with us. Yeah. Sometimes we end up watching them like Saturday night and recording on Sunday. And just because of our schedules.
Yeah.
And so if we figure that if we have 2 weeks between each film, that'll give us more time to like properly talk about the film and do like our due diligence as far as our research goes. And for ideas that we've had, like we wanted to do the next 2 films together, The Killer and Hard Boiled, the 2 John Woo films, rather than talk about John Woo 2 weeks in a row. And this will be really helpful for things like the Samurai trilogy, which is coming up soon. We don't have to do 3 weeks of talking about each Samurai trilogy movie. We can do it into one.
And we also don't have to cram it all into 1 week's worth of viewing either. Like we don't have to do all 3 movies in that week and then do research on all 3 movies, although they're kind of the same one. But fear not, We are not going to do an episode every other week. We're going to have an episode each week. But basically what we're going to do is we're going to take the beginning part of our episode, the news and what's on our mind, the discussion part that doesn't have anything to do with the Criterion. We're going to make that a separate episode. To start off, we're going to talk about Star Wars when it comes out. Yeah,
so starting with our very next episode will be the first episode where we have an episode where we talk about what's on our mind and like movie news and this modern movie stuff, and that's going to be our Star Wars review episode. And then the next week will be the next set of Criterion films, which are going to be the John Woo films. And then it'll just go every other week. You get either the movie news / discussion followed by the Criterion film.
We think it's going to give us a little bit more time to make sure that we give a great episode for the Criterion podcasts and
thoroughly discuss our news and our topics.
Yeah.
And it also allows us to touch on things that we might want to talk about a little more in depth that aren't Criterion, and we don't have to pack it into, 10 minutes at the beginning of an episode,
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's pretty exciting. Let us know what you guys think. Do you like this idea? Do you not like it? Just send in some feedback, and we want to hear what you guys feel about this.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Wow,
I think it's going to be fun. You said it. Took the words out of my mouth. All right. Well, you ready to talk about A Night to Remember?
Yes, I am.
How many people are there on board?
2,200 or more. And room in the boats for... how many?
1,200.
This is the epic drama of the greatest disaster in the history of the sea.
Okay, Night to Remember is basically the story of Titanic, which I would guess most people who listen to podcasts would know, at least based on the 1997 James Cameron movie Titanic. And from other places.
Have you seen this movie before? Was this your first time to see it?
This is my first time.
Okay.
I guess for the rare person who doesn't know what Titanic is, it's a giant ocean liner, and it set out on its very first voyage across the Atlantic from England to the United States in 1912, and it hit an iceberg and sank.
I'd seen it in high school, so a while ago, but only parts of it. And I think when you're forced to watch something in high school because it was part of I'd read the book and then we got to watch the movie or whatever. But when you're forced to watch something like that, you are predisposed to dislike it because you've been forced to watch it. And I don't remember it. I don't remember liking it though.
Yeah.
But yeah, I enjoyed it quite a bit. Have you seen Titanic, the James Cameron movie?
I have.
I have not. So yeah. And at this point, so what happened actually was my friend and I both went to go see it, and Titanic was sold out, and so we couldn't go see it. And at that point, I was like, nope, I'm never going to see Titanic. So it's
because it's sold out.
Yeah, well, that and because everybody else had seen it. And I was like, nope, I'm not going to watch it because everybody else has seen it, and it'll be a thing of pride with me that I've never seen it where everybody else has.
Yeah, in my hometown, it came out when I was in 6th grade, and we had a one-screen movie theater at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was a small screen, and I think it sat something like 150, and so they would only play one movie at a time. In my town, and Titanic was there, and I remember being annoyed a little bit because all the girls in my class were obsessed with Leonardo DiCaprio in it, and I was not interested in a romantic drama period piece, and so I was kind of disappointed. Well, I don't have any cool movie to go see this week at the movie theater because I did go a lot.
Yeah, although this isn't a Titanic. This is the Night to Remember. But I did want to mention those things because Titanic is such a cultural touchstone, and then this is kind of the predecessor to that.
Yeah, it's hard to talk about this film now that Titanic has come out, just because there are so many similarities too. There's, it's very clear that James Cameron had seen this film and probably read the book and lifted a lot of those things from it. Which, to be fair, it's a lot of it is based on true story and survivor accounts and their stories. Mm-hmm. So a lot of it's going to be the same, but there are a lot of similarities between the two films.
Right.
But we don't have to talk about it much anymore unless it just comes up. We can move on. A Night to Remember was one of the biggest British films of the 1950s, probably the biggest. It was certainly the most expensive film made by the production company that made it, which was the Rank organization. And they did a lot of British films and at the time, and a lot of the ones that they did, or at least their bigger ones, ended up on Criterion Collection. Films like Black Narcissus and the Red Shoes, and David Lean's Brief Encounter, Great Expectations, and the Laurence Olivier film Henry V, and maybe one or two other that I'm forgetting. They made a lot of like really well received like big films, but this was the most expensive one they ever made.
Which is another thing that ties into the 1997 James Cameron Titanic.
That's true.
Yeah.
And to the actual Titanic, because
that
was also the biggest boat ever made. So why not do the biggest film?
Yeah.
When it came to America, it won a Golden Globe for the Best English Language Foreign Film. But despite the critical acclaim that the film got, it actually struggled here in America because it didn't have like a movie star in it. Like the cast is kind of... Or there was no one that like American people knew as a movie star. And I mean, there's kind of a main character, but
it was more of a
very loosely a main character. I think like it's just the person who has the most screen time, really, more than they're like the crux of the film and the person who the film is about. Because the film is definitely about the ship, I would say, and the people on it as a whole and their experience.
Would you say who's the antagonist, or not the antagonist? Who's the protagonist in this?
I don't know. That's interesting because I don't know that I could pick a protagonist. I guess there's like a lot of people with their own stories.
Yeah, are there several protagonists, or is the antagonist and the protagonist the iceberg and the ship, and then everybody else is just kind of a story around them?
I don't know that it works one way or the other. It's just there's just no like central
main
character. Yeah. I don't think. I think that depending on who you are as a person, you might latch on to a different character.
Yeah. So it's not the traditional Joseph Campbell journey of the hero type story. Yeah,
I don't think so. No, the director Roy Ward Baker, he did a lot of like B movies. This was actually seems like the biggest film that he did based on my research. He did like disaster films, horror films, sci-fi films. Towards the end of his career, after making A Night to Remember, he actually ended up doing like a lot of TV shows. I don't think like nothing as big as A Night to Remember. He got to start in films, working as, from what I can tell, kind of like a production assistant. I always saw the term was like a T-boy or something like that, or I can't remember if that's the exact term that was used, but it's something like a T-boy. And from what I gathered, it was the person who like was making tea on sets and like bringing or like going and getting people tea, the equivalent of like the gopher going to get coffee or whatever. And eventually he worked his way up to assistant directing. And funny enough, it's listed that he was uncredited, but apparently he worked as the assistant director on The Lady Vanishes, which we talked about. I think that was Spy number 3, right?
Yes, I believe so.
Which the connection there was
that's pretty stunning.
Really funny, and I guess he learned a good bit about suspense and the craft by watching Alfred Hitchcock in that film, because that's one of the things that I think this film does really well is like the suspense and the mood.
Yeah.
After that, when the war started, he joined the army in like their sort of like film. I want to say squad, but that's not the right word. Division, yeah,
something along those lines.
Yeah, and he made a lot of like technical training films. And during that time, he worked with Eric Ambler, who would actually go on to write the screenplay for A Night to Remember.
Yeah, so this movie is based on a book by the same name, written by Walter Lord. For the book, he basically got in touch with a lot of the survivors and wrote out their stories. And
I think he had like over 60 some odd survivors contact him and that he worked with
and talked to you about this. That's actually pretty cool.
Yeah.
I had to read that book in high school and I don't remember anything.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds interesting now. It does.
It's not a very long
totally
book
imagine
either.
dreading it in high school.
Yeah.
Yeah, and producer William McQuitty is another person of note. I think it was kind of his idea to take the book by Walter Lord and make it into a film, and he kind of had a personal connection to the Titanic story because he grew up in the town where they were building and constructing the Titanic. So he like walked by it every day, or
as they're building it.
However, probably not literally every day, but
right.
It saw it like go from like start to finish. And I think he was 6 at the time. And he said that like the whole town was like proud of like the Titanic, of like this ship that was the biggest ship ever built at the time. Mm-hmm. And it was just this big point of pride for the town and for Great Britain. And he remembers that. So like when it sank, like it affected everybody and him really hard. So he had like this personal thing with the story.
Have you ever seen Downton Abbey?
I have not.
Like as a way that it affected everybody. Downton Abbey opens with the Titanic sinking. Like the characters in the house get word that the Titanic has sunk, and they can't believe it. You know, it's and I think that that's a good way to understand what people back then felt, or how they felt about the Titanic and how it affected everybody. Like that was one of those. It's probably one of those moments where you're like, where were you when? You know, like you remember what you were doing when you found out the Titanic sank.
Yeah, I guess. Do we have anything? I mean, I know we do, but like, what would be our big thing in America like that? I know like, the first thing that comes to mind, and it's probably not the biggest thing we've done, but like the Hoover Dam. I just think like if you had just built the Hoover Dam and they like went to turn it on, and then it just like failed and like flooded a bunch of stuff. Yeah,
I mean 9/11 or Kennedy being shot.
Sure. We have those moments, I guess. I mean, like, do we have anything that like we built, like some grand thing that we built that
the Challenger blowing up?
Sure, yeah. So it's kind of similar to that.
I remember when the Challenger blew up. Of course, because everybody, you know, like,
of course you did.
You probably
That's
weren't.
The point.
Yeah. But I remember my mom crying. I was like, I don't know what happened, because I was really young at the time.
I think I was born the year that the Challenger blew up.
Shut up.
Go on, Chris. I'm waiting for you. I've shut up.
Now I'm stuck in figuring out how old I am. Anyways, so yeah, it's one of those things where you remember, like, that was what the Titanic was. It was a moment that everybody has in common, and then everybody remembers where they were at the time they found out.
Just a fun fact I learned while I was doing research. Some of the people who were in the film, because the film was shot at Pinewood Studios, which is a big studio in the UK, and I think they shot like the James Bond films there, and just a ton of it's like Cinecittà was to like the Italian cinema, right? Like it was just like
Cinecittà
like
being
the big studio, yeah. Anyway, so some of the people who were in the film when like smaller parts was a woman named Honor Blackman, and supposedly Sean Connery, although I did see a report that that's not true. But I also read that it was true that he was one of like the crew people, like in the bottom of the ship, and another guy named Desmond Llewellyn, and they all went on to star in Goldfinger, as obviously Sean Connery was James Bond, Honor Blackman was Pussy Galore, and Desmond Llewellyn played Q in lots of the Bond films. So it's just really interesting.
Cool. Yeah. All right, so are we ready to dive into the actual movie?
Sure, let's dive in. Do you have your life jacket?
Yeah. What do they call it? Life belt. Yeah, it's too uncomfortable for me, and really this podcast can't sink, so...
Yeah, it's unsinkable. What was that? Was that someone trying to sink our podcast?
Yeah, oh, God. Where's my life belt?
Okay.
Yeah, so this movie opens... It really makes you kind of pay attention, like those big crowd scenes around the ship. Like, those are some pretty awesome scenes. I think were those real footage of a ship being launched? Before we go to the Queen or whoever launches the boat. But like the massive crowd shots around the boat. Because those couldn't have been just extras. They were using some sort of other footage, right?
I think so, yeah. I know that definitely there's footage of the ship when it launches and it comes off. That's actually the Queen Elizabeth launching in 1938. It's footage taken from that. Here and there in other places in the movie, they have what looks like real footage, and some of the other footage is actually taken from a 1934 German propaganda film, which was named Titanic. And I don't really know what that film was about. I didn't necessarily have time to like dive into it in my research, but I would guess maybe it's just showcasing like British failure of Titanic.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't know if they were making fun of him or just being like...
That'd be an interesting thing to look into.
Yeah.
But I do think it's funny that they took it and put it in their own film, screw the Nazis.
Yeah, I don't know if they intended to do that. It would like give kind of a middle finger buzz off to the Nazis.
I'm going to pretend whether they did or not. I'm going to choose that it was.
Yeah, I like the idea that they do it for that. So, if you like something, it's probably the truth.
Yeah. They really kind of went really far in and wanted a lot of authenticity in this film. So, of course, there's some parts that aren't authentic, like the christening of the ship, where they break the bottle. Like that actually didn't happen. They didn't actually christen the ship, and some people say that's why it sank, because they didn't stick with tradition. It was the White Lines didn't normally do that, the name of the company that owned the Titanic.
Yeah.
One of the survivors from the Titanic, the fourth officer, he was on set as a technical advisor.
Yeah, I think he worked like directly with the producer and the director.
Yeah. I always wonder how much that actually influences, like how much more authentic does it make it, Are they just paying them to be there so they can say that it was authentic?
Yeah.
But
yeah, I mean, I think from what I've read, it does hold up as one of the more like accurate retellings of the Titanic story. You have to consider certain things, that it was made in 1958 and the wreckage of the Titanic wasn't discovered until 1985. There are certain things they discovered when they discovered the wreckage that they didn't know. I think mainly the big one that if you watch like James Cameron's Titanic and this one is that like the ship kind of like goes up and then splits in two in the modern version. It's because we know that the ship split in two now.
Right.
But as far as like the dress, the meals that were served, the rooms, like they even went as far as like getting the artwork on the walls right. Although I think the main one, the scene where the guy like leans on the fireplace with like and there's the clock. I don't know if it's a fireplace.
Yeah, I think it was. He was in the main foyer.
Yeah,
and it's right before the ship sinks.
Yeah. He like leans on the clock, and then there's the young couple next to him. Like that painting above him, I guess like researched like which painting that was, and it turns out they were wrong the whole time. And they did their research wrong, and it ended up being the painting they put in there was actually from I think like the sister ship to the Titanic or something like that, and they just got their wires crossed, I guess.
But the attempt is what counts.
Yes,
they really wanted to be authentic on this.
Yeah, and kind of in the realm of authenticity, or just something that was really impressive to like the links that they went to make this film is that when they were going through the script, on every page they had indicated the angle that the ship was leaning to maintain continuity, because the films are shot out of order, and so if they're shooting a page, they know like what angle the film needs to be at, and they actually built the sets and the set of the ship like on things where they could lower and raise it and tilt it and give it the angle that it needs.
On that note, I really enjoyed the part, or because it's kind of counting off like how bad it is on the ship, but they have the little dolly, the meal cart in the first class, and as the ship starts to tilt little by little, like the meal cart starts to kind of roll and move a little bit more
until I think kind of climax when then finally it rolls off, it hits into something else and sits that down, and then we get the shot of like all the bread falling off and the dishes all falling. He also does that with the rocking horse, which like he doesn't go back to it as much, but we get the one shot in the beginning of the rocking horse, which is an interesting thing to do because it's a rocking horse, so like generally you have that image and I guess memory or whatever, a perception of a rocking horse moving, right? And like so when you have one like perfectly still and you know that like the ship's sinking or gonna sink, I can't remember if it happened, if that shot's before it hits the iceberg or after.
It's before. It's right when she's tucking the kids into bed.
Yeah. He holds on that shot and you just kind of have this anticipation of like you're waiting for the rocking horse to start to move and tilt and suggest that like it's not as steady or something's gone wrong. I'm
going to pitch you an idea. We're going to remake A Night to Remember, but instead of the Titanic sinking, because that rocking horse is so creepy, like the rocking horse is going to stalk and kill everybody on board the ship. Because
oh my gosh, were you that disturbed by the rocking horse?
Yeah, absolutely. That rocking horse was scary, and I think that we could do a movie where that rocking horse just stalks everybody on the ship and kills them.
Just be like Child's Play, but
yeah, or more like James Cameron's Aliens or Alien.
James Cameron's rocking horses.
Yeah, because it's just Anyways,
something else that I thought was really impactful for the majority of the movie, like especially once the ship is hit and it's flooding and they're starting to move people around and bringing them up to like put them on the lifeboats, is like there's a lack of score. So we have score in like the few moments where something like really intense happens. Otherwise, we just have like the sound of the ship and like the ocean and the creaking and all of that. And like there's something really impactful about that to me. Like it's sort of a more of like realism. I think we talked about this the same thing with 400 Blows, when Antoine's like running at the end and we just hear his footsteps and no music to tell us what to think or how to feel. And for the majority of the time, that's what they do in this movie.
It kind of lends itself to the authenticity too, right? Like we have the score from the or not score, but the band playing the music. So we have the band a lot of times in the background to lean on for the music.
Yeah.
But it lends itself to the authenticity of the movie, for the movie.
Yeah, this
makes
is the
it
feel of
more
it.
Real, yeah.
Yeah, it gives this sort of like documentary-esque feeling. And yeah, I don't know, did you notice the lack of score? Like, I don't know if that's one of those things that I pay attention to.
I didn't notice it, but that, like I didn't notice that there was a lack of score. Oftentimes, with the older movies, because they are different, like you're kind of taking it all in and watching it new and fresh, especially the older ones. Now that you mention it, I know that they use the music from the band.
Yeah, there's the music from the band playing, and then there are times when, like, once they get away from those scenes, like you don't even have like the band filling in the background. Right. You just get like straight up like ambient noise and the noise of what's going on. And honestly, as much as I like the movie, I do feel that the points where they did put like score in were a little bit weird to me, because all of a sudden it would be this like big like high pitched like string instrument like sting sort of thing to accent something that happens that's super intense. And like, I mean, it's kind of it's like super effective because we don't have score, and then all of a sudden it hits in and kind of like hits you like a punch in the face. But I don't know, like, and it always threw me off and maybe it's because I was paying attention to the fact that there was no score, and all of a sudden there'd be score, and I was like, oh, I kind of liked it better when there wasn't. Like, I think it's just kind of getting a little too like melodramatic with that score. So I don't know, I didn't really like those.
Who was your favorite character? So we follow a bunch of people around. Which one's your favorite character?
I mean, I felt a lot for the dad who has to like say goodbye to his like two daughters and his son. Like that really moved me. I had this like connection with that. Not that I don't have kids, or anything like that. It's just something that like, and he didn't seem like overly snooty. I guess he was rich, but he didn't seem like, he didn't act like some of the other people do about it. For somebody that hears that he's about to die, he took it so well. He's just like, all right, that's it. And he doesn't get mad at his wife. He's like, please, just get on the ship and go. And he's just calm and collected. And you see him, like, there's maybe a moment where you see a little bit of emotion. And maybe I'm reaching, but, like, as he gives his son away, there's, like, this little moment where, like, maybe you see that a little, like, emotion about that whole thing. But the whole thing was, like, he goes and he talks to, I think, the shipmaker, and they're like, give it to me straight. I'm not one to panic. And they're like, we have an hour and a half. And so he just goes about everything so cool and calmly. I thought it's really interesting. When he has to do that for the kids and for his wife to like get them to go on the ship. Because I think he does even tell them, like, I'll catch another ship. Yeah. Or I'll catch another lifeboat. Yeah. And he knows there isn't going to be one. Yeah, it's just something about that. I mean, that's something that's happened in many, many films since then, probably before then. Yeah. But it just works for me.
Noble sacrifice.
Yeah. And so who was your favorite character?
She wasn't in it as much, but the rich lady that like had become wealthy. She married a gentleman that found a bunch of gold and became rich. And so she wasn't part of the upper class. She wasn't born into it, but now she is part of the upper class, but she still acts like she's lower class. So they're on the ship, and he's like, she gets all sassy with the seaman that's in charge of the boat. And they're like, let's go get some more people. And she's, like...
Oh, yeah.
So I think, especially in the second half, when she's on the boat, she's my favorite. Like,
Yeah.
Don't sass me. We're going back.
Yeah, and I'm sure that came from a real person and like people's recollection of a real person. But FYI for you who have not seen the James Cameron Titanic, like that, she has a much bigger role.
Oh, does she?
That character
Really?
in the Titanic one, and she's played by Kathy Bates, who is amazing.
What?
And she's probably, maybe like to my recollection, because I haven't seen that movie in years, but like I remember her being one of my favorite parts because she's just kind of funny because she's, like you said, she's not from the upper class. She moved up into the upper class, so she still has like all of these sort of like lower middle class like tendencies that kind of make all the other people she's around like turn their noses up at her. Like, I can't believe I'm having to dine with her.
She may have the money, but she's not one of us. Type of thing.
It's a good choice for favorite character.
I really want to watch Titanic now. Like, I've never been this close. I've never wanted to, but now, like, because of this movie, and I liked it so much, I want to watch Titanic and see. But gotta keep my resolve.
Yeah.
So the baker, also one of my favorite characters.
Yeah.
The baker's the one that goes off and he gets drunk as the ship sinks. And he was actually a real person as well. I think most of these characters are based on a real person. The baker's real story, he gets drunk, ties some chairs together and survives and like just rides it out.
And they kind of split that up into...
There was another character that tied some chairs together.
Yeah. It was a separate character in this film that tied chairs together, and that guy didn't survive because like his chairs got broken up when the ship went under.
How did the baker survive this? I forgot.
Eventually, like, we don't see him for a while, and then when they're all floating around on the lifeboats, and you have the group of people that have the capsized lifeboat, and they're all standing on top of like the underside of it, and it's floating. He's floating on that. And that's like the next time I remember seeing him. Like, we see him on the ship goes under, we don't see him forever. And then all of a sudden he's like swimming alongside that boat and someone's like holding his arm so he can stay with him.
Oh, okay. And then they bring him up when another guy dies and they're like, put him off to the side. And so they bring him up.
And he can come up.
Okay.
Yeah. And that's how he survives, which I was pumped that guy survived.
Yeah. He's pretty awesome.
he's like the comic relief of the film. And I think therefore very likable.
Yeah, absolutely.
So to have him die would maybe just be a little bit more than I could handle with all the other
take it.
sadness of the film. Yeah, and I think we mentioned it before, but the wood creaking noise that happens like as throughout the film, where like as the ship's sinking more and getting under more stress, you have this like horrendous wood creaking, right? Mm-hmm. And that noise is just super unsettling.
Oh yeah.
Like, you would think that that's something that they added like intentionally for effect and like sound effect, but as I was watching the documentary that is on the Criterion edition, it's like a 50-minute documentary, and it's mainly comprised of like interviews, and they're interviewing William McQuitty, the producer, and Walter Lord, who wrote the book, are like the main two interviews that make this up, and then they have photos and like behind the scenes footage from the making of the film. And he was talking about how they had the ship on the things to like raise and lower it to give it like the different angles
to tilt it.
Yeah. And there was actually that making the set creak in the scenes.
Oh, as they tilted it?
As it was like, it was tilting and it was like putting the set under stress. And like when it was happening on the set, they were like, that's great. We'll just keep shooting the scene and it'll do that. And like, they were like, this actually sounds like the wood creaking that was going on in the ship. And I assume maybe like the guy who was the technical advisor was part of that conversation too. Yeah. But like those, for the most part, I think are not added sound effects later. Those are actually on set and just the sounds of the set creaking, and it works.
That's
really,
genius.
really well.
That's one of those happy accidents, like, hey, this works out, like.
Yeah, I do oftentimes think that like, that's one of the best things that can happen while you're making a film is the happy accidents, the things that you don't plan and aren't necessarily like written down in detail. Like a lot of the films that I made, like the short films, like my favorite moments that came out of the film were the happy accidents, things that were just like, let's try this, let's try that. And it was
that
fun.
And my performance, right?
Well, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Oh, and another thing that I had learned in the documentary was that there was a story in a part of the script, and I guess a part of the book too, where they were floating on the capsized lifeboat, like when they saved the baker and everything. They had like supposedly 25 to 30 people were all standing on the underside of that capsized lifeboat, and like some of the people on set, like I think it might have been the producer, questioned the authenticity of that story. They were like, I don't think that's possible. That doesn't sound like it would work. And so when they actually went to like shoot that scene, and this is a scene where like they've got all the people on and they're like beating people off and not letting them on the boat because they're afraid it's going to capsize. Well, like they went to shoot that scene and it actually like literally worked. They just turned the lifeboat upside down and they put like 25 to 30 people on it and it stayed afloat. And everyone was like, well, I guess that's real. I guess this can really happen. And they didn't have to, I guess maybe they were testing it and then we're going to see if they had to do, like rig up something to fake that, but they didn't. Like it was just,
It worked out well.
real.
Tell me a little bit about the models of the ships that they used. So obviously on the long shots, there's a model of the ship or miniatures probably, and the little lifeboats that were also miniatures, but they got the little oars to move a little bit.
They have like extensive footage of this in that documentary, that's something I was wondering while I was like watching the film, because you can kind of tell now that it's miniatures and the people on the lifeboats aren't really moving.
It looks really good, but you can tell,
Yeah. And they built like models for the ships. They had their exterior of the Titanic was 35 feet long, which is, I don't know, feels kind of big.
For a model?
But, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And so that was really big, and they built the little lifeboats to scale, and they had people in them, and the rows were like electronically operated, I guess like battery powered to like turn. And what I found really interesting when they were talking about it is that they had to, I guess it was in like the movement of the water was weird because everything else is to scale, like the boats, the people, and the Titanic, but the water's not. Oh, that makes sense. So like, because like the movement of the water didn't seem right or something like that.
Like
so
the waves are way too big.
Yeah. Or like it was moving too fast. So what they did was they shot the models at like a higher frame rate, like higher than 24 frames per second. And then, so like those model shots are being played back like in slow-mo. Okay. In order to like make the waves right. And then they talked about they did have some issues because everything was to scale, but like a water drop looked huge and massive, like in comparison to like the ship. And so they just had to deal with like that sort of stuff while shooting all the models. So
that's really interesting.
It's impressive. And I always find model work to be like really, really interesting because I've never done it. And I don't know like quite how to wrap my head around like getting your perspective right to actually make it look right. Like, as you said, we can tell that it's models, but I think it's down to things like the people not necessarily moving. Getting that perspective right is just really impressive. I have no idea how they do that.
Let me ask you, as a comparison, so the CG in Titanic and then the models in this movie, you can tell in both places that they're not real, correct? Like the CG, how much better does Titanic look than this?
I remember Titanic looking better, but at the time I was in like 7th or 8th grade, so like I don't know. And I watched it on VHS, which is obviously not the clearest way to watch a film. So like maybe if I watched like the Blu-ray that was like really detailed and like nice and clear and crisp, like it might be easier to tell. But I also just wasn't aware of like CG and what that, because I kind of, I watch a film like Jurassic Park, which I saw like 100 times in theaters as a kid, and like never noticed the CG dinosaurs. And you watch it now, and a lot of it looks great, like the animatronic stuff. But when they do the CG dinosaurs, like you can really tell. Yeah. So I'd have to go back and watch it to be able to answer that question clearly. We did kind of talk about that last week with Beauty and the Beast, right? Like the Beast's like makeup costume. Versus like a CG creature. Beast. So I guess it made the same question, like, would you rather see models that you could tell were kind of models, or would you rather see CG?
This is just occurring to me as we speak. So, but like I think they're both kind of the same, right? I can tell that both of them aren't real, right? Maybe the CG sometimes can look a little bit better, but for the most part, you can tell when CG. I mean, like the closest thing to getting it right, I think, is Planet of the Apes, where the
original, the Charlton Heston.
No, the reboot.
Or no, Rise. It's Rise.
Yeah,
of the
like the prequels to Planet of the Apes.
Okay.
Like with the CG characters, where I think I would rather have that CG character than someone made up in clothes. But that's the outlier, I think. Like for the most parts, you can tell when it's CG, and CG gives that uncanny valley where you're just like disturbed by what it looks like.
Well, I think model work has come a long way, too. So, like, Independence Day, one of your films that you mentioned on the top 3 that you love endlessly and think it's your favorite film in the world.
Yeah, absolutely.
Independence Day, they use models for, like, when they blew up the White House and, like, blew up the Empire State Building. And, like, that model work, to me, looks really, really good. Like, I don't think you necessarily tell unless you know. But even, like, films that have that sort of destruction, like the Roland Emmerich films of recent years, where like every monument in the world gets destroyed and it's all CG. Like you can really tell that that's CG.
Yeah, I think some kind of combination of both is the best way to go, right? You know, like the Star Wars prequels don't look very good because they're basically animated movies because there's so much CG in it, right? And then the original trilogy doesn't look that great, although I still think it looks better than the prequels. But a combination of the two being where we're at now, like what J.J. Abrams did with the Force Awakens, I think a combination of the two like is really where it's at and what you need to do. I like some sort of balance is really what you need.
Yeah. So there's a lot of the things to talk about with this film are like the historical aspect and the historical context and like the filmmaking techniques and things they did to like get it authentic and like real. As far as like any sort of theme goes, I thought one that was like really big, and we've had this in some other films we've talked about on the podcast so far, is like the divisions in class, right? And the dignity that like one class likes to have, and they feel superior to the people below them. And I guess there's an arrogance about that, right? But like that was like really prevalent to me. Like I guess arrogance in general. Well,
arrogance that we have created this thing and it cannot sink. You know, like this faith that was for the whole first part of the movie when they're like, "Hey, this boat's gonna sink." They're like, "What? No, it can't sink."
Yeah.
What do you like? Stop joking around.
Even when someone tells them like, "You're on the ship and it's gonna sink," they're like, "Nah, it's impossible." What are you talking about?
Yeah.
And even the people not on the ship, like other boats that they contacted, it's like the Titanic's says they're in distress and they're sinking, and it's the people are like, "Nah, the Titanic can't sink."
Yeah, quit joking around.
Yeah, and just to have that whole attitude about your ship is that like it can't sink. I think I read that nobody who was like building the Titanic ever said we're making an unsinkable ship or the ship's unsinkable. I think it was sort of like a journalist like wrote an article or in a paper or something and used the word that it's unsinkable, and that like phrase really caught on. It wasn't so much like White Star Line who built it, like they weren't saying they made an unsinkable ship. But that arrogance goes to the upper class people, right? Like like they're even arrogant, and as far as like when they're made to get up on top and go to the lifeboats, they're like, hold on, I got to dress up. I got to dress up, or like I don't want to wear my life vest because this is uncomfortable, or like
it makes me look silly.
Yeah.
It really shows like what the priorities of each class was. And unfortunately for the lower class, like they were all blocked off and they couldn't make it up there at all. Like they weren't even supposed to. They didn't really make it up there until the end of till after everybody had been boarded. All the ships
right
were
before
gone.
The ship goes under.
And that part kind of reminded me of Snowpiercer. Have you seen Snowpiercer? I
have not.
Oh, well, so Snowpiercer, the general idea of it is the lower class is on the very back of the train. This is after an apocalypse, and they are fed whatever, and they're treated really poorly. They end up fighting their way to the front of the train, and they go through all these different cars, and they see the how the first class lives. Anyways, it reminded me a little bit of that, like the scene where they make it up there, and they're in the ballroom, and they see how the first class lives, as opposed to being all packed down there. That was a really good scene.
Yeah, their reaction to it was really powerful. And I think powerful because they're running to save their lives and get to the top of the ship and hopefully get to a lifeboat. And but when they see the first class area, they're so taken back by they stop for a second. And
they're like, we've been packed like sardines down there, and this is first class. This is insane, you know.
We even had the scene where after the iceberg hits and the ice is on the ground, all the lower tier people come up and I guess they start playing what looks like soccer.
Yeah.
They're just kicking the ice around and making a game out of it. And we get that scene of one of the upper class wants to go down and play. And I think the woman that he's with is like, you can't go down there with them. You can't be seen.
Right.
And something that the producer was talking about in that documentary was that the lower class people paid $12 per ticket, and the upper class paid I think $850 a ticket. And there was really, they had more accommodations and stuff, but obviously a ticket could cost $12. But he was saying that part of the arrogance of the upper class is that they just wanted to pay more, or they would pay more because they could. There was never a question of
we see that
of comparison between the two costs.
Yeah. We kind of see that today, in name brands. If you buy the name, if you have all the name brands, then you're better,
I think that just shows why the upper class people are so non-panicked compared to the lower class people. Because I think in paying so much money, they probably had a bit of a sense of that they're paying for their safety, which is kind of true.
Yeah, they were the first ones on the boat. They didn't so to a certain extent, a lot of them were saved. But it's just the arrogance of those people,
And something that the producer says in the documentary again is that in regards to that is that he thought this story in the Titanic was so important because it sort of ended some of that arrogance. It ended, I think ships now all have one class. At least there's nothing super low
are there that many transport ships besides cruises?
I guess so. Well, I say now, but in the documentary I think it was in the 90s or something like that. I don't know, but
even then
it's just the division in class has changed. There's no longer that lower area of
there's not
sort of a
class.
peasant.
Yeah.
A peasant class. You could probably pay for a little bit more accommodation
on an airplane
experience.
They don't put you in the baggage compartment.
Exactly. Yes.
There's first class and basically regular class.
Yeah. And then more practically, I think it brought about regulations for lifeboats.
Yeah.
A number of
the lifeboats had to match everybody that's on board.
Yeah.
Which seems like a logical thing. It's weird how...
It does.
Yeah.
I remember when we were studying the Titanic in school, supposedly they had enough lifeboats for everybody on board, and then they didn't like the way that it looked. They thought it made the ship uglier to have so many lifeboats hanging off of it. Mm-hmm. So they took half of them off for the first ride.
Yeah. This whole thing is the whole thing is arrogant, and mistakes made, they're sending people off on boats that are half to a quarter full. It's just a crazy series of horrible mistakes.
It's one of those things when you're watching a film that is leading to an inevitable disaster, an event, you have that feeling when you're watching it of you want to grab the characters and be just do this, this one little thing, the guy who doesn't understand Morse code in the other ship, who listens in as the person who does understand it is asleep, And he just like, rather you just like, if he just wakes up that guy and be like, hey, there's this message, like, what do you make of it? He would know, and then the whole thing can be averted.
Yeah.
But he's just like,
it's
oh well, and just shuts it back off.
Yeah, it's almost comedic in the sense, like he does everything. He like rolls over and he's just about to wake up, and you're like, and for some reason I know how Titanic ends, but I'm like, come on, wake up, man, come on, just a little bit more. and then you're like, well, maybe he'll just leave it on, and then he turns it off, and you're like, oh, or like, why are they shooting off rockets? They must be having a good time. How,
yeah, they must be signaling to some other ship to watch out for icebergs.
Right. And then once the ship actually sinks, Titanic sinks, they're like, oh, where'd they go? And they're like, I don't know.
I guess
they're
gone.
like, mark it in the log.
Yeah.
What? Like,
yeah, which like in a film that wasn't so true with such dire consequences, like those scenes would maybe be funny.
Yeah.
So it's a comedy of errors in a sense.
So my favorite moment in the movie is, and it's kind of splits up. So there's a lead up to the iceberg hitting, right? Mm-hmm. And then nobody realizing how bad it is. And then there's a moment where I think the captain is like, all right, go get the guns and ammunition. We might need them later. And then the very next scene is this lady trying to get onto one of the lifeboats, and she's just screaming. And she's in between the Titanic and the lifeboat, and she looks like she might fall. And at that point, the movie changed for me. Like, it became much more suspenseful, much more like what's going to happen next, and like that's where the movie really picked up and just started.
Yeah, because up until that point, they're maintaining this mode of like not panicking and order,
right.
And you can kind of sense that slipping, and the captain senses it, and so we kind of slip into panic mode after that. And the woman like hanging in the boat is like total trailer moment. It's like probably like the most intense, like just from like an action standpoint, like of the film, like it's the most intense moment. And I think it's like a key point in the trailer that I watched for the film.
So what did you think coming into this film?
I was not excited to watch it at all. Like, because I knew the story, I knew what happened, and I just like the cover art didn't intrigue me. As like petty as that sounds, but like some of the Criterion films that I've watched in the past, like I've just bought because I've been somewhere and I'm like, oh, check out that cool cover. Yeah. and I bought it and I watch it, right? And so like there's just a lot of things that made me not excited about the film, and I was sort of dreading watching it a little bit. Like, I've owned it for years.
Oh, really?
Years. Yeah. I found it in like a really cheap used section at like a movie store. Like, I think I bought it for $5.
Yeah.
And so I've just had it, and I've not wanted to watch it. But like, I watched it last night after I got home from a wedding, and I didn't have that much time before I needed to go to sleep. And I was like, oh man, I'm a little tired. I don't know if I'll make it. I'll at least start it. Maybe I'll have to wake up early and watch it. But like, I watched the whole thing. My girlfriend was the same way. She was like, I'm not going to watch this whole thing. I'm just going to sit here for a minute. And she ended up watching the whole thing with me. And I was so surprised at just how well done and like captivating it is. Yeah,
I felt the same way. And I was I got off work and it was kind of late, and I was like, well, I'll like, I got my notes, like my pen and pad to take notes. And I was like, well, I'll take notes. It's 2 hours long. I'll get through it. But yeah, once it kicks it up a notch, like I don't have any notes, like I was just watching it, and it was, really good. I'm still waiting for that time where we're going to come in here and it's going to be a Criterion movie and we just dislike it,
Yeah. I thought this might be that one.
I thought that we'd come in and we'd be like, well, I didn't really enjoy this that much. So far it hasn't happened. We're on episode number 7, and I've really liked every movie that we've watched so far. So,
me too.
Anyways, I enjoyed this.
Speaking of that, do you want to tell them what our next films are, Chris?
Yeah. In 2 weeks, we're going to do John Woo, The Hard-Boiled and The Killers. Since they're, instead of spending a lot of time on both those movies, we're just going to kind of lump them together and talk about each one and the influence that John Woo had over action films. So I'm excited about that. So that'll be Spine number 8 and 9.
And in between, we'll have
Our Star Wars episode.
Yeah, like our news segment.
Yeah.
Our news segment episode, and it's going to be Star Wars: The Last Jedi. Is that that's the subtitle, right?
That's the title.
Star Wars: Last Jedi, episode 8.
Yeah, Spine number 8.
No, now you're just confusing people. Yeah, I actually struggled to see if there was anywhere where you could watch The Killer and Hard Boiled. I don't know if you, in your research, found anywhere else, but as far as I can tell, the only place to watch them is like DVD and Blu-ray. I did find like one version of Hard Boiled.
They're out of print, right?
They're out of print for Criterion, yeah. But you can buy the DVDs and Blu-rays. Like those are pretty cheap and like readily available, especially through like Amazon. But I did find a copy. I didn't see that you could rent it anywhere. It's not on Filmstruck. It's not on Netflix.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
Neither of them are. I did find Hard Boiled on YouTube. Like it's just up there on YouTube. Someone has it up there, and I started watching it, or at least enough to test if it was there. But otherwise, I think DVD or Blu-ray.
Wow.
Yeah.
Good luck finding that, guys.
Yeah. Okay, so let's move into our top 3 for this week, and on the theme of the movie, we're going with our top 3 disaster films. And I don't know, what kind of criteria did you have for like pulling your disaster films? Was it natural disasters or other things?
Just anything in which a disaster happens, something. I mean, it'd probably have to be something along the lines of A Night to Remember, where it's kind of this slow build kind of.
Maybe, yeah. I feel like I guess I don't know if I widened my net too far, but I included things like maybe like a zombie breakout as a disaster. Yeah. Right?
Although, yeah, okay, that'll work. Yeah. I thought about maybe zombies, but I don't think there was really anything that I wanted to really
that you would put in your top 3, so you didn't have to answer that question. I did. But yeah, go ahead. Give us your first.
My first one is Apollo 13. Tom Hanks and Ron Howard. It's really hard to... when you think of a disaster movie, to not put Apollo 13 in there, I think. It's just a really great story of humanity overcoming the odds and coming back from space. And we live in Houston, and I recently visited the Space Center, so...
Me too.
It was... Yeah, exactly, and they talk about that. So it's really, especially once you've visited it, it's really difficult not to respect what they went through. It's really amazing seeing the computers that they have, and knowing that we have more computing power on our phone, and they brought somebody back from space with less computer power. And what do I do with my phone? Do
we want to know?
No. No. Like I play Words with Friends,
Candy Crush.
Candy Crush, yeah. The little micro payments. Anyways.
Sure. Yeah, Apollo 13, I have not actually seen since it came out, and I'm not even sure I saw the whole thing. I watched the majority of it with my...
Get out.
Uncle.
Get out. If you haven't seen the whole thing.
Yeah. Anyways, I watched the majority of it, but it seemed great, and I should probably watch it, especially now that I live in Houston.
Yeah, it's really great.
So, okay. My first one is going to be Dawn of the Dead. It's my zombie outbreak. That seems like a disaster to me, and it threatens all of humanity. Well, yeah. So, yeah. To clarify, the Zack Snyder version, okay. I do like it more than the original version. I've seen both, like the George Romero one. I've seen both, and I prefer the new one. It's more fun. The zombies are like fast moving, and they like sprint instead of just walk around. Yeah. So just a little more on edge, and I think it's just kind of goofy, kind of fun, and I really enjoy it.
I think that might be my favorite Zack Snyder movie.
As it should be. No, I really like Watchmen. Ugh. I probably think Watchmen is a better movie than that one. No? Okay.
All right, my next one is also in space, Gravity.
Okay.
Gravity, while it's probably a metaphor for depression or grief, it is a really, really amazing movie.
Yeah, it's intense.
Yeah. did you see it? I saw it on the IMAX.
I saw it in IMAX and in 3D.
You have to. I didn't. Oh, yeah, I think it was in 3D. But anyways, intense and just really well acted, and Sandra Bullock's basically in there by herself. But I love, the metaphor of grief, and how like she goes through the whole grief process, and then at the end she just stands up and walks up onto the beach, and it's just a really good movie, I think.
Yeah. I mean, metaphors aside, even if that wasn't in there, like it's just like impressive and entertaining, and
that long take
beautiful.
when it opens. I'm sure there's cuts in there, but it seems like a really long take. But
and all the technical stuff they went through to to make that film is all amazing. I don't want to go into it, but if you ever have the time, like look up things about the process of making that film. It is impressive. My next choice is one of my favorite movies, and one of the movies that got me started on like liking what I would call good movies, and that would be Children of Men.
Oh,
yeah. Which is, the disaster is not like super huge like Gravity or
kind of already happened.
Dawn of the Dead. Yeah, we kind of come in and basically all of the women in the world can no longer get pregnant, so the world's basically going to crap and being run down because there's no children to leave it for. So the earth is just, society's ruining itself, and
there's no future essentially.
Yeah, so which is pretty disastrous to me, but
that's the same director as Gravity, in fact.
It is Alfonso Cuarón.
Yeah,
and so that film, I saw it in theaters, and it was when I first started working at Blockbuster, and like prior to that, and I tell this story kind of every time I talk about Children of Men because it was so impactful. Like prior to that, like my favorite films were films like Happy Gilmore and Dumb and Dumber and like Talladega Nights, right? Like those were the films that I was into, and like I just wanted to watch like comedies or like action things, and didn't really have any interest in like a super serious film. Like I would have never gone out of my way to watch a drama. And I saw Children of Men because my friend Mike took me to see it, and it just like blew my mind. Like I feel like it showed me how good of a film can be. And I didn't know that a film could be that good, right? And so it just changed everything for me. So
that's awesome.
That will always be like really high up there for me.
Children of Men is one of my favorite movies. I probably like that better than Gravity. I mean, we're not ranking those movies, but Children of Men didn't occur to me in the disaster.
Yeah, no, it's kind of a weird.
It's post-disaster.
Yeah,
like the disaster's already happened, and but it fits.
It's close to on the line, but I think it's just right inside the line.
Yeah. And we get to talk about Children of Men, and anytime that happens, I remember how great it was. And
it's so good.
Anyways, all right. So my last one is a really good movie, Airplane.
Yeah,
I think that Airplane is great. It actually started like probably Airplane is the father or the grandfather of all your comedy movies, like Talladega Nights that you love so much. Just like as a goofy Leslie
certainly
Nielsen.
Like Basketball.
Yeah,
that's
Basketball.
kind of like parody.
Yeah, it's just so funny, and it's a parody of disaster movies. And there's so many lines and things that happen in it that are, quotable and enjoyable. Like the drinking problem, and he throws a drink over his shoulder.
Yeah. Like I have a dog that I got within the last year, and when she drinks from her bowl, she's very messy. And like after she's done, like all around the bowl is just water. And so I took a picture of it and like put it on Facebook and was like, my dog has a drinking problem. And like everybody gets it, right? Like it's one of those just cultural things.
Or the part where they're parking, and so the two voices that are like calling out things over the loudspeaker get into a fight about, their personal relationship. I think it's just hilarious. Anyways,
my last one, and I've got a short list here, and I'm just like maybe picking the one out of it that's best. I'm actually really sad because there's so many that I want to say and talk about. I think I got to go with On the Beach, which is this film that's got Anthony Perkins in it, and I want to say Gregory Peck, although I may be wrong about that, and which I shouldn't be because it's one of my top 3. But it's got somebody like Gregory Peck. It's either Gregory Peck or Anthony Quinn, someone who was in Guns of Navarone. And it also has Fred Astaire in it. And I don't remember the year that it was made, but because I haven't seen it in a while, but it had like a huge impact on me when I watched it. But it's basically about a world where there has been a nuclear strike and nuclear retaliation, and so everywhere in the world is like under like radiation cloud where it's dangerous to like you're gonna die if you're in there, except for Australia. And these people in Australia like are trying to figure out whether or not the radiation cloud is going to come to Australia. It kind of seems like it most likely is, like unless like the winds shift. So they have this like impending doom of like radiation, and some of them are deciding like, we've got like some submarines, we can get into the submarines and go and like live down there and like wait for it to clear out. And some people are like, I kind of just, do I want to die by radiation poisoning? Maybe I should just, commit suicide and end it all. And like I said, just the cast of like Fred Astaire, Anthony Perkins, it's an interesting cast with like a super interesting concept to me of just all these people trying to deal with that.
Yeah, that I have not seen that. I don't know about it.
I hadn't even heard of it until I saw it at like a movie store, like a used movie store, and I got it super cheap. So I was like, yeah, I'll buy this. This sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'll have to watch that, or at least look into it for sure.
Well, that does it for today's episode. As always, we want to thank you, the listener, for listening. We want to thank Jake Wagner Russell for creating our intro and outro music. If you want to listen to more of his music, you can go to soundcloud.com/bopscotch. Yeah, I think we should just reiterate that going forward, our show is going to change. So our next episode will be more of a What's on Our Mind movie news.
Star Wars
thing. Star Wars specifically this time. And then after that, it'll be a Criterion film. And then the next one will be...
It'll be every other week where we switch
we'll just alternate between those What's on Our Mind and our Criterion film review. So yeah, and if you want to follow along with the podcast, follow us. If you want to give us your feedback, like tell us what we screwed up, things we got wrong,
things we got right.
Things we got right. If you just want to tell us, hey, good job talking about this. You guys are awesome. That feels good too. You can like us on Facebook at facebook.com/casuallycriterion podcast. You can follow us on Twitter and Instagram at casualcriterion. You can email us directly at casuallycriterion@gmail.com.
Absolutely. So that does it for our show this week. Thanks so much for listening. Until next time, goodbye.
Bye.